Long before the name of Bjorn Ironside echoed through the halls of Scandinavian legend, the Viking world was a landscape of fierce warriors, ambitious kings, and endless seas waiting to be explored. The 8th and 9th centuries marked the beginning of the Viking Age, an era that transformed the history of Europe through exploration, trade, and conquest. Among the countless Norsemen who sailed across unknown waters, few names have endured with as much fame as Bjorn Ironside. Remembered as a fearless explorer, an undefeated warrior, and a ruler whose influence reached far beyond Scandinavia, Bjorn occupies a unique place where history and mythology intertwine. According to the Icelandic sagas, he was one of the most celebrated sons of the legendary Viking king Ragnar Lothbrok and Queen Aslog, though some medieval traditions suggest his mother may have been Thora Borgarhortor. While historians continue to debate the precise details of his ancestry, there is little doubt that a powerful Viking leader named Bjorn existed during the 9th century. His exploits were so extraordinary that generations of storytellers transformed his life into one of the greatest legends of the Norse world. Understanding Bjorn Ironside requires looking beyond the myths and into the society that shaped him. A world where strength earned respect, courage determined survival, and the sea offered limitless opportunities to those daring enough to seize them. Growing up as the son of Ragnar Lothbrok carried enormous expectations. Whether Ragnar himself was a single historical figure or a legendary hero created from several Viking leaders remains one of history's greatest mysteries. Nevertheless, medieval sagas consistently describe Ragnar as a fearless king whose raids terrorized England and Francia, making his household the ideal training ground for future warriors. Bjorn would have spent his earliest years learning the values that defined Viking society: loyalty to family, devotion to the gods, skill in combat, and the importance of personal honor. Unlike many medieval cultures, Viking children were encouraged from a young age to become independent and resilient. Boys destined for leadership trained relentlessly with wooden swords, shields, spears, bows, and axes, before eventually mastering real weapons. Physical endurance was equally important, as future warriors needed to survive freezing winters, dangerous sea voyages, and brutal battles. Alongside military training came lessons in navigation, shipbuilding, farming, diplomacy, and the oral traditions that preserve Norse history. Elders recited tales of Odin's wisdom, Thor's strength, and legendary heroes whose deeds inspired younger generations to seek glory of their own. These stories were more than entertainment. They shaped the ambitions of every aspiring Viking. For Bjorn, whose father already possessed legendary status, greatness was not merely a dream, but an expectation. Life in Scandinavia during the early Viking Age demanded adaptability. The rugged landscapes of Norway and Sweden offered limited farmland, encouraging ambitious families to seek wealth beyond their shores. Longships became the defining symbol of Viking civilization, combining speed, durability, and remarkable navigational capabilities. Young Bjorn likely spent countless hours aboard these vessels, learning to read the stars, understand changing winds, and navigate dangerous coastlines. Every voyage served as practical education, preparing him for future expeditions across Europe. Viking society also emphasized communal responsibility, with family clans providing protection and political support. Leaders earned authority not solely through inheritance, but by demonstrating generosity, courage, and military success. A chieftain incapable of rewarding loyal followers quickly lost influence. Witnessing Ragnar's leadership would have taught Bjorn that true power depended upon inspiring confidence as much as winning battles. Successful Viking commanders divided treasure fairly, maintained discipline, and protected their warriors while pursuing opportunities for expansion. These lessons would later define Bjorn's own leadership style and contribute significantly to his reputation as one of the Viking Age's greatest commanders. The origins of Bjorn's famous nickname, Ironside, remain uncertain, yet they contribute greatly to his legendary image. According to Norse tradition, the name reflected his extraordinary ability to survive combat, seemingly unharmed, as though his body possessed the strength of iron itself. Some sagas claim magical protection granted by his mother Aslog, who was believed to possess prophetic abilities and noble lineage tracing back to the dragon slayer Sigurd. Others suggest the nickname simply recognized Bjorn's exceptional resilience, discipline, and skill in battle. Medieval storytellers often exaggerated the accomplishments of famous warriors, transforming remarkable achievements into supernatural legends that elevated their heroes beyond ordinary men. Whether literal or symbolic, the title Ironside perfectly captured the qualities admired most in Viking culture: fearlessness, endurance, and invincibility under pressure. It became a name that enemies feared and allies proudly followed, surviving centuries after his death. Bjorn's earliest recorded military experiences are closely connected with his father and brothers. Norse sagas describe Ragnar leading numerous expeditions against England and the Frankish kingdoms, exposing his sons to warfare from an early age. Participation in raids served as essential training for young nobles. These campaigns demanded far more than physical strength. Viking leaders needed strategic thinking, rapid decision-making, and the ability to coordinate warriors during chaotic battles. Every successful raid increased prestige, attracted new followers, and expanded political influence back home. For Bjorn, these experiences likely provided invaluable lessons about logistics, naval operations, diplomacy, and psychological warfare. Vikings often relied upon speed and surprise rather than prolonged sieges, striking wealthy monasteries, trading centers, and coastal settlements before defenders could organize effective resistance. Such tactics required exceptional coordination among ship captains and warriors alike. Observing these operations firsthand helped transform Bjorn from an ambitious youth into an experienced commander capable of leading expeditions independently. Although the legendary sagas dominate much of Bjorn's story, historians also find evidence supporting the existence of an influential Viking leader bearing his name. Medieval Frankish chronicles describe Viking attacks led by a commander called Berno or Bjorn during the mid-9th century, particularly those targeting the Mediterranean coast. These independent records strengthen the argument that Bjorn Ironside was not merely fictional but based upon a real individual whose accomplishments impressed both Scandinavian storytellers and foreign chroniclers. Nevertheless, separating historical fact from literary embellishment remains difficult. Viking history was transmitted orally for generations before being written down centuries later, allowing legends to merge with authentic events. Modern scholars therefore approach the sagas cautiously, comparing them with archaeology, contemporary chronicles, and linguistic evidence to reconstruct the most accurate picture possible. As Bjorn entered adulthood, Europe itself was undergoing profound transformation. Powerful kingdoms competed for territory, while the Carolingian Empire struggled with internal divisions after the reign of Charlemagne. Political instability created ideal conditions for Viking expansion. Wealthy monasteries stored gold and silver behind poorly defended walls. Coastal towns flourished through trade, and divided rulers often lacked the resources to repel repeated Viking attacks. For ambitious commanders like Bjorn, the world beyond Scandinavia represented both opportunity and destiny. He inherited not only Ragnar's legendary reputation, but also an era perfectly suited for daring explorers willing to risk everything in pursuit of fame and fortune. The foundations laid during his youth, his rigorous training, exposure to warfare, mastery of navigation, and understanding of leadership, prepared him for the extraordinary campaigns that would soon carry his name far beyond the northern seas. Before long, Bjorn Ironside would command fleets that sailed farther than most Vikings had ever imagined, transforming him from the son of a legendary king into a legend in his own right. By the middle of the 9th century, Bjorn Ironside was no longer known merely as the son of Ragnar Lothbrok. He had earned a reputation of his own as a fearless commander whose ambition reached far beyond the familiar waters of the Baltic and North Sea. While many Viking leaders focused their raids on England, Ireland, and the Frankish kingdoms, Bjorn sought something greater. He dreamed of sailing into seas that few Scandinavians had ever explored, reaching cities overflowing with unimaginable wealth, and confronting kingdoms that had never before faced Viking longships. His growing fame attracted seasoned warriors from across Scandinavia, all eager to serve under a leader whose courage and tactical brilliance promised both glory and riches. In Viking society, success was measured not only by the treasures a commander returned home with, but also by the loyalty he inspired among his followers. Bjorn excelled at both. Contemporary chronicles and later Norse sagas describe him as a leader who rewarded bravery, shared plunder fairly, and inspired unwavering confidence before battle. These qualities transformed him from a respected warrior into one of the most influential Viking commanders of his generation, capable of organizing some of the most ambitious expeditions ever attempted during the Viking Age. One of the defining moments of Bjorn's career came through his partnership with another legendary Viking leader, Halfdan, a commander renowned throughout Europe for his cunning, boldness, and relentless pursuit of wealth. Together the two men assembled an enormous fleet of longships, carrying hundreds, perhaps even thousands of experienced warriors. Their destination lay far beyond the rivers and coastlines familiar to Scandinavian raiders. Instead of returning once more to England or Francia, they pointed their ships southward toward the Mediterranean, one of the richest and most sophisticated regions of medieval Europe. This decision alone demonstrated extraordinary ambition. The journey required navigating dangerous coastlines, unpredictable weather, unfamiliar political landscapes, and vast distances that stretched Viking logistical capabilities to their limits. Every harbor they entered presented new opportunities as well as new dangers. Yet Bjorn embraced these challenges, recognizing that fortune favored those willing to venture where others hesitated. His Mediterranean expedition would become one of the most celebrated voyages in Viking history, proving that Norse seafarers were not merely raiders of isolated monasteries, but masters of long-distance naval exploration, capable of reaching the heart of the civilized world. The expedition first brought Bjorn's fleet to the western coast of Francia, before continuing into the Iberian Peninsula. Along the way, Viking warriors attacked prosperous coastal settlements, monasteries, and trading ports, collecting immense quantities of silver, gold, livestock, and valuable goods. Medieval Christian chroniclers often described these raids with horror, portraying the Vikings as unstoppable forces descending unexpectedly from the sea. Although these accounts reflected understandable fear, they also unintentionally highlighted the remarkable effectiveness of Viking naval strategy. Bjorn's longships possessed shallow drafts that allowed them to navigate both open seas and narrow rivers with equal ease. This flexibility enabled his forces to strike rapidly before defenders could organize meaningful resistance. Unlike traditional medieval armies, burdened by heavy equipment and slow supply lines, Viking fleets remained highly mobile. They landed unexpectedly, attacked swiftly, gathered their spoils, and disappeared before large defensive forces arrived. Bjorn refined these tactics with exceptional skill, carefully selecting targets that combined wealth with limited military protection. His understanding of speed, surprise, and intelligence gathering became one of his greatest military strengths. As the fleet sailed farther south, they reached the Muslim-ruled territories of Al-Andalus in modern Spain. These regions represented some of the wealthiest and most culturally advanced societies in Europe during the 9th century. Powerful cities, thriving trade networks, and magnificent architecture astonished the Norse visitors, who encountered customs, languages, religions, and technologies unlike anything found in Scandinavia. Despite facing stronger defenses than many Christian kingdoms, Bjorn's forces continued their raids with considerable success, although Muslim armies proved capable opponents and occasionally inflicted significant losses upon Viking attackers. These encounters demonstrated that Viking expansion was not a simple series of effortless victories, but a constant test of adaptability and leadership. Bjorn quickly learned that success depended upon understanding local conditions, rather than relying solely upon brute force. His willingness to adjust tactics according to circumstance helped preserve both his fleet and his reputation as an intelligent commander, rather than merely a reckless adventurer. Continuing eastward, Bjorn eventually entered the Mediterranean Sea itself, reaching regions that few Scandinavians had previously explored. Medieval sources describe Viking attacks along the southern coast of France, the Italian peninsula, and nearby islands. Among the most famous stories associated with this expedition is the legendary assault on the city of Luna in northern Italy. According to later Norse tradition, Bjorn believed Luna to be Rome itself, the magnificent capital of the Christian world. Realizing that the city's fortifications appeared too strong for a direct assault, he reportedly devised an ingenious deception. Pretending to be gravely ill, Bjorn requested permission for a Christian burial within the city walls after supposedly converting on his deathbed. Once his coffin entered the church, he suddenly leapt out alive, drew his sword, and led hidden Viking warriors in opening the city gates for the waiting fleet outside. Whether this dramatic tale actually occurred remains highly doubtful. Most historians consider it legendary, likely inspired by similar stories circulating throughout medieval Europe. Nevertheless, the persistence of this account reflects how Bjorn's reputation for cleverness became as legendary as his battlefield courage. Even if fictional, the story perfectly captured the qualities Viking audiences admired most: boldness, intelligence, and the ability to outwit seemingly invincible enemies. Historical evidence confirms that Bjorn's Mediterranean campaign inflicted significant disruption across coastal Europe. Frankish and other contemporary chronicles mention Viking fleets operating far from their northern homeland, demonstrating both extraordinary navigational skill and strategic planning. These expeditions also produced enormous economic rewards. Returning warriors brought home silver coins, precious metals, luxury goods, fine textiles, weapons, and exotic artifacts, acquired through both raiding and trade. Such wealth strengthened Scandinavian political leaders, financed future expeditions, and stimulated commercial networks stretching from the North Atlantic to the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic world. Bjorn's success therefore influenced not only military history, but also the economic development of Viking society. His achievements prove that Scandinavian expansion could extend far beyond traditional targets, encouraging future generations of explorers and traders to seek opportunities across distant seas. Equally important was the psychological impact of Bjorn's campaigns. Throughout Europe, stories spread of fierce northern warriors capable of appearing almost anywhere along the coastline without warning. Kings and bishops ordered stronger fortifications, improved coastal defenses, and expanded naval patrols in response to the growing Viking threat. Bjorn's name became synonymous with fearless exploration and military excellence, inspiring admiration among his own people while striking fear into the hearts of many opponents. Unlike commanders who relied solely upon physical strength, he demonstrated remarkable strategic vision, understanding that mobility, intelligence, discipline, and adaptability often mattered more than overwhelming numbers. His leadership transformed scattered bands of raiders into coordinated naval forces, capable of projecting power across thousands of miles. By the conclusion of the Mediterranean expedition, Bjorn Ironside had accomplished something few Vikings could ever imagine. He had sailed farther than most of his contemporaries, challenged powerful kingdoms across multiple continents, and returned with immense wealth and unmatched prestige. No longer living in the shadow of Ragnar Lothbrok, Bjorn had established himself as one of the greatest Viking leaders of the 9th century. His extraordinary voyage would secure his place in both historical records and Norse legend, setting the stage for the final chapter of his life, his rise as a king in Scandinavia, and the enduring legacy that would survive for more than 1,000 years. After returning from his legendary expeditions across the Mediterranean, Bjorn Ironside was no longer simply a celebrated Viking raider. His victories had elevated him into one of the most respected leaders in Scandinavia, earning him not only immense wealth, but also the political influence necessary to become a king. According to the Icelandic sagas, Bjorn established himself as the ruler of a large portion of what is now eastern Sweden, and became the founder of the Munso dynasty, a royal line that later medieval writers claimed ruled Swedish lands for generations. While many details surrounding this period remain debated among historians, there is broad agreement that a powerful Viking ruler named Bjorn likely governed parts of Sweden during the latter half of the 9th century. Unlike the centralized kingdoms that would emerge centuries later, Scandinavia at this time consisted of numerous competing chieftains and regional kings, each commanding the loyalty of local warriors and influential families. Authority depended less on inherited titles than on personal reputation, military success, and the ability to reward followers. Bjorn possessed all three. His extraordinary campaigns abroad had filled his treasuries with silver, gold, weapons, and exotic luxury goods gathered from distant lands. More importantly, they had earned him something no amount of wealth alone could purchase: the unwavering respect of warriors who had sailed beside him through storms, battles, and unknown seas. In Viking society, such loyalty formed the true foundation of kingship. Ruling Sweden demanded a different kind of strength than leading overseas raids. A successful Viking king had to balance diplomacy with force, settling disputes among rival clans, while maintaining alliances through marriages, trade, and shared military campaigns. Seasonal gatherings known as things, where free men assembled to debate laws and resolve conflicts, played a crucial role in Scandinavian politics. Kings could not simply issue commands without considering the opinions of influential landowners and respected warriors. Bjorn therefore needed to demonstrate wisdom alongside courage, ensuring that justice appeared fair while preserving his own authority. Medieval sagas portray him as a leader who understood these responsibilities well. His experience abroad had exposed him to numerous cultures and political systems, giving him a broader perspective than many Scandinavian rulers who rarely ventured beyond their homeland. Whether negotiating trade agreements, organizing defenses, or settling conflicts between neighboring chieftains, Bjorn's leadership reflected the practical intelligence that had already distinguished him on distant battlefields. Rather than relying solely upon fear, he cultivated respect, knowing that loyal followers fought harder than subjects ruled by intimidation alone. Trade flourished during Bjorn's reign, and this prosperity became one of the defining characteristics of his legacy. Although Vikings are often remembered primarily as raiders, they were equally accomplished merchants, whose commercial networks stretched across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. Swedish Vikings in particular developed extensive trade routes through the rivers of Eastern Europe, connecting the Baltic Sea to the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic caliphates. Merchants exchanged furs, amber, iron, walrus ivory, honey, and slaves for silver coins, silk, spices, jewelry, fine weapons, and luxury goods from distant civilizations. Archaeological discoveries throughout Sweden reveal thousands of Arabic silver dirhams buried in Viking hoards, demonstrating the remarkable reach of Scandinavian commerce during Bjorn's lifetime. As king, he likely benefited enormously from these expanding trade networks. His previous expeditions had proven the immense wealth available beyond Scandinavia, encouraging further exploration while strengthening the economic foundations of his kingdom. Prosperity increased not only royal influence, but also the standard of living among communities participating in long-distance trade, transforming parts of Sweden into important commercial centers within the Viking world. Religion during Bjorn's lifetime remained deeply rooted in the ancient Norse faith. Temples dedicated to Odin, Thor, Freyr, and other gods served as centers of both worship and political life. Sacrifices known as blots were performed during seasonal festivals to seek divine favor for harvests, voyages, and military campaigns. Odin represented wisdom and victory, Thor symbolized strength and protection, while Freyr embodied fertility and prosperity. Although Christianity had begun spreading throughout Europe, and occasionally reached Scandinavian shores through missionaries and merchants, the old gods still dominated religious life during Bjorn's reign. Sagas often portray Ragnar Lothbrok and his sons as devoted followers of Odin, embracing the belief that warriors who died bravely could enter Valhalla, where they would prepare for the final battle of Ragnarok. Whether Bjorn personally held these beliefs exactly as later writers described remains uncertain. Yet the spiritual traditions of the Viking Age undeniably shaped both politics and warfare. Courage in battle carried not only worldly rewards, but also eternal significance, encouraging extraordinary acts of bravery that became central themes within Norse literature. The question of Bjorn's descendants further strengthened his legendary status. According to medieval genealogies, he fathered several children, including Refil Bjornsson, who supposedly inherited his authority and continued the Munso royal line. Later Scandinavian kings traced their ancestry to Bjorn Ironside, using these connections to legitimize their own claims to power. While historians cannot verify every generation of these royal family trees, such traditions reveal the immense prestige associated with Bjorn's name. Associating oneself with Ragnar's famous son became a powerful political statement, reflecting centuries of admiration for his accomplishments. Much like the descendants of Charlemagne in continental Europe, Scandinavian rulers recognized that legendary ancestry reinforced authority. Even if portions of these genealogies blended historical memory with myth, they demonstrate the enduring influence Bjorn exercised long after his lifetime. Perhaps the most intriguing physical connection to Bjorn Ironside lies on the island of Munso, in Lake Mälaren, west of modern Stockholm. There stands an enormous ancient burial mound, traditionally known as Bjorn Ironsaide's Heg, or Bjorn Ironside's Mound. Rising prominently above the surrounding landscape, the mound has been associated with Bjorn for centuries through local tradition and medieval writings. Although archaeologists cannot conclusively prove that the burial belongs to him, its impressive size reflects the status reserved for exceptionally powerful rulers during the Viking Age. Monumental burial mounds serve not merely as graves, but as enduring symbols of political authority, reminding future generations of the greatness achieved by those buried within. Whether or not Bjorn himself rests beneath this mound, the site's continued association with his name illustrates how deeply his legend became woven into Sweden's historical landscape. Modern historians approach Bjorn Ironside with careful balance, recognizing both the value and limitations of medieval sources. Contemporary Frankish chronicles confirm the activities of Viking leaders named Bjorn during the 9th century, particularly those participating in Mediterranean expeditions. Archaeological discoveries support the existence of extensive Scandinavian trade networks and royal centers consistent with the political world described in later sagas. At the same time, centuries of oral storytelling inevitably introduced exaggerations, heroic embellishments, and symbolic narratives that transformed remarkable historical figures into legendary heroes. Rather than diminishing Bjorn's importance, this blend of history and mythology reflects the profound impression he left upon both his own people and his enemies. Few individuals become immortalized simultaneously in foreign chronicles, archaeological traditions, and epic literature. By the end of his life, Bjorn Ironside had achieved something extraordinary. He had crossed seas that few Vikings dared to navigate, challenged kingdoms stretching from the North Atlantic to the Mediterranean, ruled as a respected Scandinavian king, and inspired generations of storytellers whose accounts preserved his memory for over 1,000 years. His story embodied the very ideals of the Viking Age: courage, exploration, leadership, ambition, and an unrelenting desire to leave a lasting legacy. Long after his ships disappeared beyond the horizon and his warriors laid down their weapons, the name Bjorn Ironside continued to echo through Scandinavian history as one of the greatest Viking leaders ever remembered. Few figures from the Viking Age occupy the boundary between history and legend as completely as Bjorn Ironside. More than 11 centuries after his lifetime, historians continue to debate where the historical warrior ends and the legendary hero begins. Unlike modern historical figures whose lives are documented through official records, letters, and eyewitness accounts, Viking leaders lived in a world where stories were passed from one generation to the next through oral tradition. These tales were shared around great halls during long winter nights, recited by skalds, Norse poets whose purpose was not only to entertain, but also to preserve the memory of kings, warriors, and battles. Every retelling had the potential to add new details, emphasize acts of heroism, or transform ordinary victories into legendary feats. By the time many of these stories were finally written down in Iceland during the 12th and 13th centuries, nearly 300 years had passed since Bjorn Ironside had supposedly lived. This long gap between the events themselves and the surviving written accounts explains why modern scholars approach the sagas with both admiration and caution. They are invaluable cultural treasures, yet they combine genuine historical memories with symbolism, folklore, and literary imagination. Even so, beneath these legendary layers lies convincing evidence that Bjorn Ironside was indeed a real Viking leader whose accomplishments left such a lasting impression that they became larger than life. One of the strongest historical arguments supporting Bjorn's existence comes from contemporary Frankish chronicles written during the 9th century. Unlike the Icelandic sagas, these records were created much closer to the events they describe. Frankish monks and royal officials documented repeated Viking attacks across Western Europe, naming several Scandinavian commanders who led major expeditions. Among them appears a Viking leader identified as Berno or Bjorn, whose activities closely resemble those later attributed to Bjorn Ironside in Norse tradition. These chronicles describe Viking fleets sailing deep into the Mediterranean, attacking wealthy settlements along the coasts of Francia, Spain, and Italy. While the Frankish writers naturally viewed these raiders as enemies rather than heroes, their accounts unintentionally confirm that Scandinavian commanders possessed remarkable navigational skills, military organization, and the ability to project power across enormous distances. Historians often consider such independent sources particularly valuable because they were written without any intention of glorifying Viking leaders. When combined with archaeological discoveries and later Scandinavian traditions, these records strengthen the conclusion that Bjorn Ironside was almost certainly based upon a genuine historical figure rather than a purely fictional creation. Archaeology has also contributed significantly to understanding Bjorn's world. Across Sweden, Norway, Denmark, England, France, and Eastern Europe, excavations have uncovered thousands of artifacts dating to the Viking Age. Burial mounds, longships, weapons, jewelry, imported silver coins, runestones, and fortified settlements reveal a society far more sophisticated than earlier stereotypes suggested. Rather than existing solely as violent raiders, Vikings maintained extensive trade networks connecting Scandinavia with the Byzantine Empire, the Islamic caliphates, and even Central Asia. Thousands of Arabic silver dirhams discovered in Swedish burial hoards demonstrate the enormous wealth flowing through Scandinavian commerce during the 9th century. These discoveries support the historical context surrounding Bjorn's Mediterranean expedition, illustrating that Viking fleets truly traveled extraordinary distances while engaging in both trade and warfare. Likewise, the impressive burial mound traditionally associated with Bjorn Ironside on the island of Munsö remains one of Sweden's most enduring historical landmarks. Although no definitive archaeological evidence proves that Bjorn himself lies buried there, the monument reflects the type of royal burial expected for an influential Viking king whose reputation endured long after his death. Despite this historical evidence, many stories surrounding Bjorn clearly belong to the realm of legend. The famous tale describing his capture of the Italian city of Luna by pretending to be dead remains one of the most entertaining episodes in Viking literature. According to the saga, Bjorn ordered his warriors to carry his coffin into the city after convincing local clergy that he had converted to Christianity on his deathbed. Once inside, he supposedly sprang from the coffin, sword in hand, allowing hidden Viking warriors to seize the city from within. Modern historians generally reject this account as literal history, noting its similarities to older classical and medieval stories involving deceptive military tactics. Such narratives served an important literary purpose by emphasizing intelligence, bravery, and cunning, rather than providing precise historical documentation. Whether or not the event occurred exactly as described, the story reflects how medieval Scandinavians viewed their greatest heroes, not merely as fearless fighters, but as clever strategists, capable of overcoming impossible odds through ingenuity. The legendary image of Bjorn Ironside grew even stronger through the medieval Icelandic sagas, particularly the saga of Ragnar Lothbrok and the tale of Ragnar's sons. These works presented Bjorn alongside his famous brothers, Ivar the Boneless, Ubba, Hvitserk, and Sigurd's Snake in the Eye, creating one of the most celebrated warrior families in Norse literature. Together, they avenged the death of their father Ragnar after his execution by King Ella of Northumbria, eventually leading the great heathen army into England. Historians believe several of these sons were indeed historical Viking leaders active during the late 9th century, although the exact family relationships remain uncertain. Medieval authors likely combined separate traditions concerning different Viking commanders into one dramatic family saga, creating a unified narrative that celebrated Scandinavian heroism, while preserving fragments of genuine history. In this way, Bjorn became part of a legendary dynasty whose influence extended far beyond any single lifetime. The fascination surrounding Bjorn Ironside has continued well into the modern era. Historians, archaeologists, novelists, filmmakers, and television producers have all contributed to his enduring popularity. Perhaps the most influential modern portrayal appeared in the television series Vikings, where Bjorn was depicted as an ambitious explorer determined to surpass the achievements of his father, Ragnar Lothbrok. While the series took considerable creative liberties with historical events, it introduced millions of viewers worldwide to Viking history and encouraged renewed interest in Scandinavian archaeology and medieval literature. Museums across Sweden now welcome visitors eager to learn about Viking society, while reconstructed longships and archaeological discoveries continue revealing new insights into the remarkable civilization that produced figures like Bjorn Ironside. His story reminds modern audiences that the Viking Age was not simply an era of violence, but also one of exploration, innovation, trade, political transformation, and cultural exchange. Ultimately, the greatest legacy of Bjorn Ironside lies not in any single battle or expedition, but in what he came to represent. To the Norse, he embodied the ideal Viking, fearless in battle, skilled at sea, generous to his followers, curious about distant lands, and determined to achieve everlasting fame through extraordinary deeds. To the historians, he represents the challenge of reconstructing the past from incomplete evidence, balancing archaeological discoveries with literary traditions while acknowledging the complex relationship between fact and legend. To modern audiences, he serves as a symbol of humanity's timeless desire to explore unknown horizons and overcome impossible challenges. Whether commanding longships across stormy seas, ruling as a Scandinavian king, or inspiring storytellers centuries after his death, Bjorn Ironside achieved the one goal every Viking warrior desired above all others. He ensured that his name would never be forgotten. More than 1,000 years have passed since the age of Viking longships dominated Europe's coastlines. Yet the legend of Bjorn Ironside remains as compelling today as it was around the fires of medieval Scandinavia. His life reminds us that history is not always written in certainty. Sometimes it survives through fragments, legends, ruins, and memories, waiting for each new generation to uncover the truth hidden within the stories. Whether remembered as a historical king, an unmatched explorer, or the legendary son of Ragnar Lothbrok, Bjorn Ironside stands among the greatest icons of the Viking Age, a man whose legacy continues to sail through history, carried by the same spirit of adventure that once drove his longships toward the horizon.